Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for something a little bit different from what I normally do. I've done a few opinion pieces to camera before, like on the Super League and the Premier League pay-per-view system, but I'm going to try and make them a bit more of a regular feature on this channel, and not just on trending topics, but on topics that have been on my mind for a while and I just want to air my views about. They'll be much more loosely edited than my scripted videos, and I'm going to try and make them every now and again, not all the time, but sometimes whenever there's something that comes to my head which I think, oh, you know what, I could maybe turn that into a topic of discussion. But like I said, I'm going to try and make them a bit more of a regular feature on this channel than I have done up to this point. Now, for the first question I'm going to ask in this kind of new series, I guess, is basically, will Eddie Howe, who is the current Newcastle United manager, be the Mark Hughes of the Newcastle project? And I'm going to explain what that means throughout this video, but for those of you who don't know, I'll provide a little bit of context to explain where I'm coming from with this. So Mark Hughes was the first Manchester City manager under the Abu Dhabi group who purchased the club in 2008, and he replaced Sven-Göran Eriksson as manager during that summer. And when he joined, they were originally under the ownership of Thaksin Shinawatra, the former Thai president, but his assets were frozen. But in spite of this, they were still able to make some very shrewd transfers, including future club legends like Pablo Zabaleta and Vincent Kompany. Although, to be fair, the less said about Joe and Talbot Naeem, the better. Of course, the club then got taken over by Sheikh Mansour's riches, basically at the end of the summer transfer window, and signed Robinho to herald this new era, usher in this new era, if you like, with this superstar signing. But they floundered around mid-table for the most of the season, and even slipped into the relegation zone in December, but they finished the season in 10th. Big money arrivals would then come in the summer of 2009, and they started off 2009-10 with 5 wins from 6, with the only loss being a 4-3 defeat at Manchester United in the 96th minute of about 93, because that's how Fergie time works. But then 8 draws in 9 games saw them slide down the table, and Hughes was sacked following a 4-3 win over Sunderland and replaced by Roberto Mancini. Basically, what I'm getting at with this context is that even though Hughes was the Manchester City manager for the first year and a half of this new regime, this new project, it's pretty clear that he was not the owner's choice. He was the choice of the previous regime, and so it kind of meant that he was almost a dead man walking as soon as something started to go wrong. So obviously the owners wanted a better manager, a world-class manager, one with a massive reputation, hence why they turned to Roberto Mancini. And evidently it worked. Over the next few years he guided City to the Premier League title, but obviously they didn't see Mark Hughes as that man to lead this project forward. Now we move on to talk about the person whom I'm comparing Hughes to, that being of course Eddie Howe. Now, he hasn't had as much time yet in the Newcastle dugout as Hughes had in the Manchester City dugout, because he joined the club in November 2021, and it hasn't yet been a year and a half since Howe took charge, and that was how much time Hughes got at Manchester City. Howe also arrived in different circumstances. He was the owner's first choice. Almost immediately after the takeover, Steve Bruce, who was the Newcastle manager at the time, was sacked after just 3 points from their first 8 games. But Mark Hughes, as I mentioned earlier, was not the owner's first choice at Manchester City. He was just so happened to be the incumbent manager when the new owners came in, but they couldn't really find a reason to get rid of him until a year and a half later. Clearly, the Newcastle owners turned to Eddie Howe because they thought he would be the person who would be a more progressive and inspirational manager who could get the best out of the players at his disposal in his system. And beforehand, the football was so stale at Newcastle under Bruce. I mean, I know he's come under a lot of criticism, some of it rightly, some of it wrongly, but the players did look uninspired, especially at the start of 2021-22. But Howe came in and immediately transformed the club. But whilst Howe's appointment didn't have the immediate desired impact, they still only won 1 game in their first 20 in the league, they turned it around spectacularly at the end of the season. I think they got 12 wins in 18 or something like that, with just 5 defeats, 3 of which were only 1-0 losses. Their January transfer arrivals were phenomenal. Dan Burn, Bruno Guimaraes and Kieran Trippier in particular, albeit the latter mostly for off-the-pitch motivation, considering he was out for most of the end of the campaign with a foot injury. But most importantly of all, the passion, the skill, the teamwork almost, all really lacking under Bruce, barring amongst a select few players, really came back in spades when Eddie Howe took charge. I mean, Joe Linton was a revelation in central midfield. Who would have thought last year that Joe Linton was going to be one of the best central midfielders in the Premier League? That just pays testament or is testament to the incredible work that Howe's done at Newcastle so far. Now, with all that context about Hughes and Howe taken into account, ultimately the question I am asking in this video, that being, will Eddie Howe be the Mark Hughes of the Newcastle project? Basically what I'm implying by that is, will Eddie Howe be a stopgap like Hughes was, essentially a manager who was appointed for a year or a year and a half before they could appoint a world-class manager to guide them to silverware and constant European football and things like that? Or is he genuinely the manager for the owner's vision, either in the short term or in the long term? And to answer that question, I genuinely think he is the man to take Newcastle to the next level. We saw how good a manager he was at Bournemouth. The players were so galvanised by what he was doing. I mean, he took them up from basically the 4th tier to the top tier. Yes, he had a stint at Burnley in between, but he guided them from administration to the Premier League within 7 years and kept them there for 5. Yes, he made mistakes, as does every manager, but to keep Bournemouth in the Premier League for 5 years is phenomenal, really, and it's a testament to his quality as a manager. I mean, they finished 9th in 2016-17, which if you told a Bournemouth fan that even 10 years ago, they would have bitten your hand off for it. The big issue for Eddie Howe as to whether or not he is genuinely the man to take Newcastle forward into that next phase is whether or not he can get his transfers right. Now, at Bournemouth, his transfer policy was a bit hit and miss, I think it's fair to say. I mean, he had some successes, including Callum Wilson, who he's now playing under Howe at Newcastle, but then you also factor in the likes of Jordan Ibe. For now at Newcastle, he has definitely done very good in the transfer market. In fact, they've just signed, I think it was yesterday as at the time of this recording, they've confirmed the purchase of Lille defender Sven Botman, who looked very likely to join AC Milan, but has decided to join Newcastle instead. And coupling that with the likes of Dan Burn, the aforementioned Dan Burn, Guimaraes, Trippier, and Matt Targett as well, who's now signed on a permanent deal for Aston Villa, I think he has got the transfers right so far, although it is still early days, of course. I think it's clear that the owners recognise the long-termism of this project and the long-termism of the transfers that they are making, because they haven't gone crazy and bought a load of superstars like Man City did in their first true summer transfer window under the new regime. Because whilst they did recognise the long-termism as well, they did also spend very quickly. I mentioned earlier Robinho being purchased within hours of the takeover as a massive statement of their intent. And then, even though they were a bit more measured in January 2009 with Nigel de Jong, Shea Given, Craig Bellamy and Wayne Bridge coming in, summer 2009 saw Carlos Tevez, Emmanuel Adebayor, Rocky Santa Cruz, Gareth Barry, Julian Lescott and Kolo Touré all come in for big fees and probably on huge wages as well. I think they spent in excess of £100 million on those 6 players alone, maybe even £120 million, which in 2009 was massive. And as a result of that, Hughes probably struggled with the ego and the squad balance that those transfers created. And Howe won't really have those problems at Newcastle because they won't have upset the wage bill, and they are not, with the best will in the world, I mean, Guimaraes is a fantastic player, Sven Botman as well is a really talented defender, but they're not world-class players just yet. So they won't upset either the wage bill or the squad mentality or ethos or morale. This also means that Howe won't have the problem that Hughes had, as I mentioned earlier, with managing this squad of massive egos that he had at Man City, which pretty much led to his downfall. I mean, as much as Hughes was a decent manager back in the day, he was good with like a mid-table squad without the overinflated egos that he was given at City. You know, Tevez and Emmanuel Adebayor, they are walking, talking egos the size of Siberia. As much as they were very talented players and had the quality to back it up, they were still, to an extent, prima donnas. But that isn't there at Newcastle anymore, and that will be crucial to Howe going forward. He worked wonders with a squad like that at Bournemouth, and now he's going to probably work wonders with a squad at Newcastle that's got a similar mentality and a similar morale, but is of much better quality, and as I say, does not have any kind of ego whatsoever about it. The superstar world-class top player signings will probably have to wait because, of course, they have no European football on offer, although City didn't have that in 2009, it must be stressed. But more importantly than the egos and anything like that, or the lack of egos, etc., the belief is there, the mentality is there. It's clear that the players are playing for Eddie Howe. They're playing also for the shirt and the badge and the kit and the fans, but they are also playing for the manager, and that is crucial for any success that Howe may have going forward. And you can see that with the performances that they've had. I mean, that game against Arsenal in the penultimate game of the season, yes, Arsenal were low on morale after they had been annihilated by Spurs in the previous game, but to tear Arsenal to shreds in the way that they did, it was non-stop. The fans were behind them, the players just did not stop running, they gave it absolutely everything that they had, and 2-0 actually probably flattered the Gunners. I mean, it was a dominant display, it was such a convincing performance, and I would argue it's the best performance I've seen from a Newcastle team probably over the last few years, and maybe even during my lifetime. And yes, of course, that was one game. We can't just judge it on one game. But as I mentioned earlier, 12 wins in 18 games at the end of the season is top 4 form. And a lot of those games, they played very well. And perhaps not to the extent that they played against Arsenal, but they still put on a very good show in most of them. And if they can do that on a really consistent basis under Howe's guidance, then the sky really is the limit. Now, is Eddie Howe the man to take Newcastle to the league title and the top tier of European football? Probably not. As much as he is a fantastic manager, and I do rate Eddie Howe, I don't think he is the man to deliver, constant league titles or success in European football. But what he is there right now, he is the perfect man for this Newcastle project, in my opinion, at this moment in time. The squad is behind him every step of the way, as are the fans, and most crucially of all perhaps, so are the owners. Whilst I don't think he will deliver the league title, I do think he will be able to deliver European football. Whether or not it's this season or season after or a couple of years' time, I don't quite know yet. And if I was to guess where Newcastle will finish right now, I don't think I would predict them to finish higher than 6th, but I also don't think they would finish lower than 8th or 9th. So European football in 2023-24 is definitely a realistic target, maybe the Europa Conference League or the Europa League. What he will do is he will be the man to basically kickstart the trend that Newcastle will have of constantly qualifying for European football. Man City qualified for the Europa League for the first time properly in 2009-10 by finishing 5th, and they've never not qualified for European football since, and they haven't not qualified for the Champions League since 2010-11. So once you get that first qualification done out of the way with the project and the up-and-coming nature of Newcastle's project right now, it's pretty much a case of once you get into European competition, you're probably never going to go out of it. And Howe will be that guy, I think, to take Newcastle into Europe. Maybe in that case, he is a stopgap to a much better manager for the club to make that final step towards that league title and that Champions League deep run or Champions League glory. But for the moment, why fix what ain't broke? He definitely won't be as summarily dismissed as Hughes was, because the Welshman didn't really have the full backing of owners or supporters, especially when Mancini was touted. But as I mentioned earlier, Howe does. And that will mean the world to his confidence, and it will probably mean that he stays in Newcastle for the long haul. So in conclusion, what I mean by stopgap, or will Eddie Howe be the Mark Hughes in the Newcastle project, is in this instance is in terms of Howe being the manager to take them to an elite level that Hughes wasn't and probably never could have been at Man City. Or is he not capable of making that next step? And as you would have guessed by now, I really do think that he is capable of taking Newcastle to the elite level. Maybe not the upper echelons of the elite level, but certainly onto the fringes, and maybe on the, I don't know what the word is, but in that elite level, but not the top tier elite bracket just yet. Maybe the league title might be a stretch too far for him, but for what Newcastle want to do right now, and also with the transfers that they're making and with the squad that they already have, Eddie Howe is the right man for them right now, and he certainly will be the right man for them over the next few years as they look to challenge and become regulars at European football's top tables. But what do you guys think? As much as I can spout my opinions on this, I'd love to hear yours as well. I don't think I'm 100% right. I mean, I can't be because I haven't got a crystal ball, I'm not clairvoyant. But what do you guys think? Do you think Eddie Howe is the man to take Newcastle forward? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about this. And If you enjoyed this type of format, if you enjoyed this more loosely edited discussion, so to speak, then let me know by dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. You can ring the notification bell to be notified whenever I load a video straight away, and I haven't actually promoted this on this channel properly before. You can also follow me on Twitter at Hazzabhajan. That will be linked in the description down below. But thank you very much for watching this video, and until next time, I will see you then.